Whew. Have you ever gotten tips and you're like, yeah, I don't know, I don't think I'm gonna want to do that? There's a lot of tips out there that people don't want to listen to. I found a video that kind of shows a little bit of this. It's called The Undeniable Photography Advice Nobody Wants to Listen to by Mark Denley. At the end of the video, I'm gonna tell you the #1 tip that a lot of people don't want to listen to that will actually make your photography 10 times better, all right? So let's get into this.
So the very first one has to do with doing less thinking and more doing. And this is something that really impacted me when I first got started and I think this is a pretty natural progression.
Very true. You get a camera, you're going to be thinking a lot. You're going to be trying to be like, is this the right camera? Is this the right place to go? You know, this and that. And then it'll actually, stop you sometimes from doing what you want to do.
I do a lot of one-to-one private sessions with clients. And one of the most common things, or the most common progressions I hear, is that when someone really gets into outdoor and landscape photography, the very first thing you do is you shoot local. You photograph your local area. But that quickly becomes tiresome. That quickly becomes boring in a person's mind. I know.
Yeah, I mean, when you first start off, you gotta photograph things that are accessible to you, right? And there's nothing wrong with that.
And what happens a lot of times is you go and you photograph your local area, then you come home. It's tiresome. That quickly becomes boring in a person's mind. I know it certainly did for me. And what happens a lot of times is you go and you photograph your local area, then you come home, and then you start doing a lot of thinking. You start watching a lot of YouTube videos, which is great. You start reading a lot, maybe listening to podcasts or reading articles or whatever the case may be, but you do a lot of thinking about photography in an effort to be ready whenever you go on your next trip. And there becomes this kind of preconceived notion that you have to go to some far off distant land, to Yosemite or some incredible national park, wherever it happens to be, before you can go ahead and start taking photographs.
Yeah, I mean, there is a fine line between overthinking and just being prepared, right? At the very beginning, it's hard to really understand what you should be kind of looking for in terms of things to research, just because you are new and you don't know yourself well enough in photography to be like, okay, I'm lacking this, right? And then so let me research that and see how can I improve in that particular way. When you're first starting off, it is somewhat overwhelming, so you're trying to take in as much information as possible so you are ready, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's a fine line between doing a little too much research and then having something kind of prevent you from going out there, for sure.
And this is where you kind of get into this rut where month after month goes by and you do very little photography at all. You might not even touch your camera for months, but you do a lot of thinking about photography and a lot of planning for your next trip. And what happens is you're just doing more thinking and less doing. You're not practicing. And what's so interesting about photography is, like I mentioned a few moments ago, people practice everything. You want to start doing something, you want to start playing a guitar, playing the piano, you practice. But when's the last time you told someone, I can't do that this Saturday, I'm going to go practice photography? It just doesn't happen. I know I never did. I don't think I've ever heard someone say that I'm going out to practice photography.
Practice photography. That'd be quite a statement. I think, at least around here, I think a lot of people just say like, I'm gonna go for a hike or something like that, and that's usually how people would say it. I don't know.
And it's just like anything else. You have to practice it. So what I would recommend
I might try that next time though. I might be like, I'm gonna go practice photography, see what people say.
And this is really the power of shooting local. Your local area is always right outside the door. It's where you live. So you always have access.
And also you might just find like dope places that you've never considered going, and it'll actually kind of give you a different perspective of where you live. And you might not find it as boring once you start looking into places to go. Just having like Google Maps or something like that, and taking a look at the environment and going like, oh, there's a mountain range here, there's a pond here that I've never seen before, and kind of exploring just in the Google Maps. It's actually going to be very, very helpful to explore your local area.
Access to it. You don't have to go to some far off distant land to do photography. It's right there in your local area. I don't care where you live. if you just have one tree, maybe in a city park, photograph that tree over and over and over again. Maybe take the things that you have learned with photography and go back to that tree and try and photograph it in a slightly different manner as you did before. And then post-process it in a slightly different manner than you did before. And just trying to create variations of that same tree. And all of that is practice. And you do that in between your trips because let's face it, most people can't go on these big trips, every single week. I know I certainly can't.
Yeah, so one of the things that you're going to be doing when you're doing kind of going to local places is kind of keeping a data bank of like this is a great place for this is a great place for that, right? So you're going to be very aware of where you can take and where you can shoot certain scenes and certain subjects. I think this is kind of what he's saying, is kind of shooting the same place over and over, and kind of playing with like the time of year, right? You might go in the winter, you might go in the summer, and during the fall, like the color is going to be different, right? A river might have more water, less water. Like the same place is not always going to give you the same image, especially for wildlife photography. And even if you're shooting like with a subject or anything like that, having a data bank of locations that you can just be like, okay, locally I can take sunset picture here, and then we can take our subject here and take these type of pictures because I've gone there before. So it kind of gives you like a good understanding of what you have available to you to really kind of be a little bit more creative later on. And keeping notes too, just having like a way for you to recall those locations definitely will help and kind of keep you practicing like that.
So what do you do in the time being in between these times? And doing more doing than thinking about photography is definitely a best practice to get into. So practice. It definitely makes perfect. I know it's a very clear.
Yeah, and also the more pictures you take, the more pictures you'll have to play with in post-production, because a lot of the fun also comes in post-production. And in terms of like editing, you might take a picture one time and you might not think anything of it. 2-3 months later, you might come back to it and you're like, actually, this isn't bad if I crop it this way, if I crop it that way, right? So yeah, even if you don't think you're taking like the greatest image right away, just doing it, you might have something to work with later on.
Cliche thing to say, but it is definitely the truth. Now, the second thing has to do with the power of perspective. And I have mentioned this numerous times on this channel, and it's very obvious. We all all humans, their eyes are at the top of their head. So that basically means that we are all adults are seeing the world from an elevated position of, let's say, 5 feet to about 7 feet tall. So we all see the world in that same way. And have you ever heard of the phrase, I don't know if it's a phrase, a saying, or a question, but it has something to do with the fact of how can you make the ordinary extraordinary? How can you make the ordinary extraordinary? And one of the most, easiest ways is to just make something look a little bit different from the way we ordinarily see the world. So if we ordinarily see the world from an elevated position of 5 to 7 feet, one of the easiest ways to make it look extraordinary, make it feel a little bit different, maybe a way to catch the viewer's attention, is just to do the opposite of an elevated position of 5 to 7 feet. Just get a little bit lower. And it is one of the best compositional advices I have ever heard, is to just get low. Getting low is great.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at taking a picture, it's easy to kind of keep your mind in this, like your perspective, your eye level type of thing. And that's because you're pretty much thinking about the viewer being you, the person who's looking at the picture being you in the moment, right? And if you kind of keep an idea of the mood that you're trying to go for, right? It's gonna also kind of give you a little bit of insight in terms of like where should I place the camera in terms of like how the height, right, or angle, because the height of any image or the way you angle it is gonna show a certain mood, is gonna portray a certain emotion, right? So if you're doing like street photography or something like that, right, and having a clear understanding of what your mood is, or what the vibe is, right? Like what you're trying to, what is the emotion that you're trying to captivate, is definitely going to put that perspective in terms of where should I place the camera, and it's going to kind of like give you a little bit more information in terms of where you should place your cameras, because mood is kind of dictated by the angle and the placement of the camera. So once you know the mood of the picture, the emotion of the picture, right? Like if you're shooting someone that you're gonna be like, okay, I want to shoot something where the subject looks overwhelming, right? You would more likely than not photograph with a camera kind of low to the ground, shooting up at an angle to some sort of degree, right? Maybe not on the ground, maybe not so much on the ground or lower, but just shooting kind of tilting up, right? Because that kind of portrays your subject as kind of overlooking you and kind of creating this sense of power over the viewer, which is you. And if you know what the viewer is supposed to feel like, the concept of perspective is going to come a little easier.
For showing off texture, it's great for showing off reflections, it's great for creating depth in a photograph, it's great for enlarging a foreground item, especially if you're using a wide angle lens. Getting low is absolutely invaluable information, and I get it, because
yeah, getting low, you also have to be very intentional with getting low, because depending on obviously the focal length that you're using, it's gonna capture different things around your frame, right? The lower you go, the more the foreground might show, right? And then does that you showing the foreground, does that add to your subject? Does that add to the mood that you're trying to convey, right? Does that frame your subject in a certain way, or is it just distracting, right? You know, I'm sure he doesn't mean like go low every single time, right? But not have it like a rule, like, okay, I have a picture, let's go low, it'll be better. No, I don't think that's what he's trying to say here. So I think it's really about kind of understanding what the foreground does and how it actually frames your subject. And getting low will actually give you more detail and more information on the foreground, which actually might, you know, create and give your subject a little bit of more dimension.
a lot of times you get on location, you don't want to get low. And the older you get, getting lower gets harder and harder, and it takes more and more effort. It's a lot easier getting down on the ground, but getting back up, it's sometimes it's a pain, and it's something that is easily forgotten. And I know that I have to remind.
And it also might look, if you're new, you might not be kind of comfortable with moving and kind of moving around with your camera, because you don't want to see, you know, you might be shy, or you're like, why is that person on the ground? And you might think like someone might be thinking about you, like something like that. So, you know, not being shy with like the angles and the way that you place your body when you're photographing, and kind of being a little less self-conscious about that. I feel like that's a big kind of like hurdle that some people face. Is you're shooting street photography, you know, you don't want to like be on the ground and trying to look at the thing, and you're like, well, I don't want to like embarrass myself by you know, trying to looking all weird on the ground or in the, you know, in the park or something like that, right? So it's kind of at the same time, like, people don't care. You gotta understand that people, most of the time, people don't care. So just like, you know, get the angle that you want without really thinking about your body and how people are gonna like see you when you're taking the picture. I feel like that's a big part of, you know, finding the right angle. Is just being comfortable with having people see you take a picture. Like, that's not a big deal, and I don't think a lot of people really care.
Remind myself time and time again. I'll get on location and I'll get my tripod up to eye level and I'll start snapping away. And 30 minutes goes by and I'm like, you know what? Let me take my camera off this tripod and start getting it lower to the ground, just to see if I can create something a little bit more unique, or something a little bit more eye-catching. And 9 times out of 10, you can always do that. And then you get your photos back home, and I bet you a lot of times those photographs that are captured from a much lower vantage point are the ones that you like the most. So getting low, or just the power of perspective, it doesn't always have to be low, but just thinking about the mindset, how can I photograph this scene, whatever this scene happens to be, in a slightly different vantage point than we all see with our naked eye on a day-to-day basis. And I feel like that is one of the best ways to create something that is eye-catching to the viewer, is when you can show them something that is not the way that they would normally see it if they were just walking by on as like a normal tourist in a specific location. So the power of perspective is absolutely huge, and getting low is monumental advice. And a lot of times it's kind of overlooked because, let's face it, getting low to the ground is sometimes you just don't think about it as often as you probably should. And then the other piece of advice, and it has to do with just the power of composition. If you want to improve in photography fast, and nobody wants to improve in anything slow. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, oh yeah, I'm going to start playing the guitar, but I want to improve in a very, very slow pace. I want to progress as slowly as I possibly can. Nobody says that. Everybody wants to improve in something that they really enjoy as quickly as they possibly can. And if you want to improve in photography fast, become a student of composition. And I would highly encourage you to go to your favorite photographers' websites or YouTube channel or Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like, nobody will listen to that. I mean, obviously, right? It's kind of like a boring tip, composition, like school type of stuff, like rudimentary. However, this comes along, kind of comes easy too once you start looking at other people's work and really understanding why those images work. And a lot of the time, it's the composition, and it's not as simple as the composition of just like, where is that person in frame, right? Are they here or are they here, right? Like, obviously that makes a difference, but there's a lot of different components to composition, not of just like where your subject is. Also the composition of lighting, like the composition of the weight of the light in comparison to the other side of the frame, right? So composition of light is really important. The composition of color, where you place certain colors, right? You got to think about it like that. In terms of like kind of helping with that, obviously, if you kind of practice shooting in black and white, that will definitely help you understand composition of light value, composition of subject, composition of light, composition of color, right? All those are part of composition that you have to take into account. And it's not just about the subject. So, kind of looking at your environment and making sure it's all somewhat balanced, right? You want to create a balanced image that, creates a dynamic viewing experience for the person that's looking at it.
Or whatever it is, and look through some of their photos that you enjoy the most, and see if there's compositional elements to those particular photographs that you really enjoy the most. And then take those compositional tools or techniques and apply them to your own photographs. Go to that.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely be like, let's start using this style of composition. But one thing that I would definitely recommend not doing is kind of starting off with that mentality. You don't want to start off with, I want to restrict myself to using this particular composition. I think at the very beginning, I wouldn't really recommend that. I might do that in maybe intermediate level of photography, just because you'll have a little bit more experience in terms of like what to look for on the back end of creating the composition. Because if you're really focused on one particular composition, you might forget at the beginning. It might be easy just to kind of forget about everything else, right? Forget about creating a more dynamic image by using the light, the way the colors are placed, right? And kind of like just putting yourself in a little box of, okay, this is the composition that I want, and you almost forget about other things, especially at the beginning. So I would definitely have an image that you really like, have a composition, right? You set the camera, it all looks really good, and then at this point you're like, okay, I'm really working on using the rule of thirds, right? Okay, so now that I have a really good picture that I think is gonna work, and I've gone through everything else that I want to look at. Now I want to place the composition part on top of that, right? And then see what that looks like, and see how you can adjust, make the slightest little changes that will fit that composition, right? And then from there, is where really good images come, because you're taking into consideration an array of things, and then composition, which just gives it that little bit of, you know what I mean? It might already fall into that too. You might just place the camera, it might look like really good, and you think about like a composition type, and you're like, oh wow, it already kind of fits this. I just need to like change it by a like very small margin, and you'll surprise yourself that your eye is actually really good, because all these compositional methods are actually things that your eye already looks for. So don't overlook your eye.
That local tree in that city park maybe, or wherever it is in your local area, and try and photograph that tree in a manner that might be similar to some of your favorite photographers, and use those types of techniques, but become a student of composition. Composition is one of those things that I believe most photographers in their first 1 to 5 years is definitely overlooked. I would say the things that most people focus on early on are how you edit your photographs, and just on location techniques, whether it's how do you get sharp photos, or what's focus stacking, or what's exposure blending, those kind of things, which are all very, very important. But if you want to improve fast, become a student of composition, because that will definitely improve your photography in the most rapid way. I absolutely guarantee it. But like I said, checking out some of your favorite photographers' work, maybe watching YouTube videos is a fantastic way to get compositional information, or tips that you can use. Podcasts, articles, whatever it is. Pay attention to composition, and that is definitely the way to make the biggest leap in your photography in the shortest amount of time. And there is absolutely no shortage of compositional tips and techniques and best practices out there. Sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming because you can't apply everything to every photograph, but just figuring out what are some of the things that really resonate to you, whether that's foreground elements, foreground, midground, background.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta understand what kind of catches your eye, right? And you'll kind of develop this understanding as you photograph more and more, right? So understanding what your eye is always kind of seeing is always really, really good thing to kind of keep in mind, because you either want to be able to highlight that even more by looking at the tools that you can do, or kind of just being able to step back and create different images with different things, right? To kind of keep your creativity flowing a little more.
On elements, or just telephoto lenses, or telephoto focal lengths, just to really isolate a subject, whatever the case may be. Just kind of figure out what really makes your heart sing, if you will, that really excites you, and I would start focusing on that. So those are 3 pieces of advice that I know I definitely didn't pay attention to at all in the beginning, and I hear, in a lot of the one-to-one sessions that I do, I talk about these things all the time, and it always seems to be kind of like a light bulb moment a little bit to a lot of people, and I wanted to make sure I share it with a larger audience here too.
That was great. This is a good video. I think it gives you a little bit of perspective on a couple different things that are definitely kind of like fundamentals in a way. So Undeniable Photography Advice Nobody Listens To by Mark Denley. Great job, good tips. So now, what is my number 1 tip that most photographers sleep on, and that I actually talk to a lot of people about, and other photographers, and most of the time they're not so hot about it either, and that's just the idea of bringing a tripod. Yeah, I mean, it's that simple. Bringing a tripod, having something to stabilize your camera when you go out, for me, has been one of the things that has like changed how I photograph, and it's actually improved the sharpness of my photographs like tenfold. I've been able to be a little more creative in terms of the shots that I take. If you're trying to capture motion, having a tripod, having something fixed to the ground is gonna definitely improve quality of your image, because holding on to the camera like this and taking like a 1 or half second exposure, right? You're gonna be moving, like no matter how many cups of coffee you don't drink, right? Before you go out, there's always gonna be some shake, and the quality of the sharpness of the image is definitely gonna change, and it's gonna limit the types of shots that you can take. So if you want to take like smooth waterfalls, right? Or skies that kind of have this like flowy feeling or something like that, having the tripod is gonna give you the flexibility to kind of shoot an array of motion that you probably wouldn't, that you definitely won't have if you just trying to handheld everything. So I hope you, next time you go out, try out, bring your tripod with you, and you know, I hope you take one of these tips and, you know, use it next time you're out. And don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe, and there's gonna be more videos like this right there, and I'll see you guys next time.